So you want to know about physio things. You got an injury, have you got something you've been working through for a long time, or maybe you just want to perform your best without getting injured? Well, my name is Phil White and I'm doing an intro for the first time because I'm on my own. So get some questions in early on this episode and I'll do my best to answer them for you. Hey guys, just me sitting behind the table here, but we do have Richie the Rig behind the mic as well, behind the camera. Hi Rich.
What's going on, guys?
There he is.
Welcome back to the show.
The producer himself is here as well. So a bit of a different episode today. There's a lot going on in the gym at the moment, so I am, I've left Rad to his own devices, and Yanni's got a lot to get on with, so we're doing a good old-fashioned Q&A. Oh, good old days, hey? That's what we always used to do.
Physio Wednesdays, was it?
No, we had some Physio Wednesdays in there. I think we've done a Tuesday. I think Thursday's maybe the only day we haven't done a Physio Q&A special, so...
Maybe next week, huh?
One day.
Tick it off.
A guy can dream. But yeah, anyway, this is, I think, a good opportunity for some of the listeners. There's been a couple of posts on the UMS Movement Mastermind group, and we've put those into a little document to get through. And otherwise, if you are watching live, get any physio or even like sports science related stuff, like my degrees in exercise sports science, and then doctor of physiotherapy. So I know a thing or two. We've been training a lot, and so is Rich. So we'll do the best we can to help you out. But just remember that this doesn't, an online Q&A does not equal medical advice. This isn't a consultation where I've done things with you, so please make sure you do seek medical advice.
If you're listening to the show or watching the show live and you have some questions, drop them in the chat and we'll answer them live for you.
Yeah, or just say hi. It's a big table. I'm down here on my own, so it's nice to get some names popping up in the comment section. So we'd love to hear from you.
Cool. Shall we start with the first one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Simon Coppola. I'd like to ask for some advice, please. I have joined a martial arts class and I'm very stiff in fear of getting injured. I'd like to ask for advice on which program I should be purchasing, elements of mobility programming, or is there another program I should be doing instead? Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Cheers. So he wants to prevent injury through the mobility. What do you reckon, Phil? Is that a good way of going about it?
I think it's such a good general one to get started with because it really gets to part of a rant that I love to have. And so any chance I get to have a big rant here is always fun for me because no one can stop me at this table. But it's a Rich, I guess. But basically, people always think, and rightly and understandably, and you know what I used to think as well, but like that stiffness equals, like the answer to stiffness is always you need to do more flexibility and mobility. Now, while that is totally understandable and sensible, I think people often misunderstand why we get stiff and what the best approach is. Because when you think about why something gets stiff and why muscles go into spasm and contract, and why you get unable to access certain ranges of motion, often the case is that the muscle just isn't quite conditioned to actually go into that range. It hasn't got the strength and endurance and control to go into that range of motion, because as we've talked a lot about with flexibility before, flexibility is so much a neurological factor. Does your body trust you going into this range of motion? So flexibility is and mobility is training is a great way of accessing that range of motion. But if you aren't getting elements of strength and building up strength endurance, then you're leaving a lot on the table. So with this as well, like when you think about why the body would get stiff, if you think about like your back muscles, imagine if you've had a big day of training, you've done a lot of deadlifts and back extensions and all of that, and then maybe you've gone out for or maybe you've been sitting at your desk and you're sort of just slumped into a position, your back's just getting sore and tired, and then you go do something that's, you help your parents move house in the evening, and so you've put your back under a lot of load throughout that day. Now, if you think about the muscles of your back, if they when they got totally fatigued were just like, nah, I'm peacing out, I'm going to just like turn off, that would be really dangerous for the spinal cord. So basically what the body does when fatigued is, instead of going what we do and you go to sleep and go and relax, the body will do something separate, which is really lock into position and stop movement. So then a lot of people think like, oh, I'm really stiff and sore, I'm going to aggressively stretch to try and undo some of that stiffness. But really what you're doing is your body's saying, hey, I don't want to access this range of motion right now. I haven't got the strength and capacity to deal with it. And you're like, nah, I'm gonna push myself into extreme range of motion. And I've talked about plenty of times before, the range of motion variable is one that is so common for causing pain and injury. So that's just a bit of a background on this rant, and why I think that while I love that you're being proactive about dealing with your stiffness, and I think that the mobility programs are excellent for that, I just want to make sure that you're realizing that building up strength, load capacity, and muscular endurance and control is so important for mobility. What do you reckon, Rich?
100% agree. Next question.
Just quickly on that program, just to give him some sort of actionable advice on which program would maybe be better. There's a reason why with the UMS program, which is what the guys do at the gym, so what the Unity members do in the gym is a balance of strength, flexibility, and fitness. And so the nice thing about that is it's making sure you do get plenty of flexibility training in there. When you're doing an upper body strength day, you're doing lower body mobility, and when you're doing lower body mobility, you're doing strength, you're doing upper body mobility. So pairing it together is a great idea, and then getting some fitness in there, making sure you're cardiovascularly fit as well, provides a really great metabolic condition for your whole system to be in. And when your metabolic system is in a good place, then that lowers systemic inflammation and all these other things that can cause that feeling of stiffness. But just to be very specific about your case as well, you're saying you recently joined, it sounds like you recently joined a martial arts class, and this is a really common time when we see people get injured, is when you're starting something new. So what we're going to do is just start to build up some conditioning, build up some strength and mobility, so you and weave that into your martial arts. But if you try and add everything all at once and go from 0 to 100, that's where you're going to get stiff and injured. So really just gradually build your way up into an athletic body. Cool.
Awesome.
And guys, if you are watching live, let us know who you are and get a question in early so we have time to answer it. Next question, please, Rich.
All right, next question. LJ Flippin. Is it better to run or sprint on asphalt and concrete during high-intensity training exercises?
And I did see that you did provide a bit of an answer for it, which was good at the time. And yeah, I think it's a really great answer. And so often the answer for what's like when just trying to decide what's best, and that is it depends.
Yeah.
And so do you want to run through your initial answer? Do you have it?
Yeah. So I think I answered the question along the lines of depends what your goals are with running and everything. There's a bit of a trade-off whenever you're running on different surfaces when it comes to a soft surface versus a hard surface. What are your limitations? Some people should avoid high-impact things because of injuries and whatnot. So obviously running on the harder surfaces might not be the answer. If you want to condition the muscles in your feet and things like that, then soft surfaces like sand is really good for that. But yeah, what were you thinking, Phil?
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. There are pros and cons to different types of surfaces, and there are times when, but I guess the biggest thing that is probably trumps what type of surface you're running on is your programming and how you basically build up into doing what you want to be doing. So this is probably going to sound similar to the last question as well, but it's just so key for people to understand with injuries. Like your body will adapt to what you spend your time doing, but if you try and go from 0 to 100 and do too much too fast, that's when injuries happen, because you don't give yourself that chance to adapt. What we want to try and do is, like with progressive overload, is like push up to a threshold, and that stimulus will then will be the catalyst for a response and an adaptation. But if we go too far beyond that threshold and go above a certain buffer, and the buffer will be bigger or smaller, depending on partly your training age, which is how experienced you are with that particular type of training. It'll also be some metabolic factors. It'll be age will play into it. A whole series of different factors will play into that, how big your buffer is. But basically, if you go over that buffer, that's where injuries start happening. So that could be, you try and run too hard, too fast, and tear a hammy, or you might develop an Achilles tendinopathy, or start to cause your joints aren't conditioned to impact yet, and you can cause some issues there.
I guess you could say the same thing with soft ground. If you go straight into saying running on the sand too early,
100%. It's just it. So that people often say don't run on concrete because it's high impact, but impact is a wonderful stimulus that will create a really important response for increasing bone mineral density, and also for conditioning your cartilage and joints to build up strength and condition over time. But at the same token, just because the ground might be soft, that might be oh great, it's low impact, but man, it is so challenging for your stability muscles when you're running on soft ground, and especially if you're doing barefoot sand running, where your intrinsic foot muscles, so the muscles within the foot itself, will have to work very hard, and when they haven't been working hard for most of your lifetime living in shoes, that can be a real shock, and people can get all sorts of foot pain. But plantar fasciopathy, so plantar heel pain, is one of the most common things that people you might have heard plantar fasciitis, different names for it, but that's a really common one for people who haven't got the foot conditioning to be able to deal with soft sand or barefoot running. And then your Achilles, because when you're running in barefoot, you don't have a raised heel at all. Often running shoes will have a bit of a raised heel, and that really deloads the Achilles. So going from running in on hard ground in a slight heel, to soft ground on with no heel, that will create a lot of load and a lot of stimulus for your Achilles, and almost certainly, unless you are really smart about it, will exceed that buffer and cause some injury. So with everything running and pretty much everything training, you just want to gradually expose yourself, make sure you respect recovery times, and gradually build up. But I think ideally, if you when choosing what kind of surface you're working with, it's basically do you have a specific goal in mind for a sport or an activity? So if you are doing something a sprinting sport, American football, rugby, whatever, then do the work on grass, because that's the medium which you're going to be working with. If you're doing, maybe if you're doing asphalt and concrete, then something like a CrossFit Games or something where you're running on that hard ground. If you're playing beach volleyball like I do, then doing your sprint training in that context is going to condition yourself for that context. So,
and if you're not working on any goal in particular, just to get fit and get better at running, what do you reckon? What have you got access to?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for exercise is whatever is convenient. So if there's concrete outside your house, but it's a half an hour drive to get to a nice patch of grass to run on, or sand, then do the thing that you'll be able to do consistently, because that's going to give you the best results, and that's going to condition your body to a response.
So don't worry about the impact too much to your joints.
The thing is, impact is good.
Yeah.
I hate that people think that impact is bad, and it's just like with anything. It's like saying weight is bad. It's like saying too much flexibility is bad. It's it's a variable that gives a stimulus, and if we go too heavy on that stimulus, then you're going to get a bad result. But if we go too light in that stimulus, then we don't condition our body to it. And impact is so key. And with the state of the aging population and the prevalence of bone mineral density issues, and joint arthritis being one of the most common reasons why people get hip replacements, or actually, the bigger thing in working in aged care rehab was people would end up in hospital and usually lose their independence because they fall over and break their hip. If they had a higher bone mineral density, then that same fall wouldn't, and if they had the muscle mass around it, that wouldn't have caused a broken hip, and they could have stayed independent for longer. But because that bone has realized, hey, I haven't had much impact in the last 30 years, I guess I don't need to be so dense. So I'm going to leach those, the calcium in the bones and the other minerals in the bones to go elsewhere. But if we can gradually if we can sensibly and gradually increase your tolerance to impact, then that's actually going to be a really positive stimulus. It's called Wolff's Law. That is what stimulates bone growth, and you need impact. You can't, like, resistance training isn't as good as like actual like hard impact.
Yep.
So that's just my little impact.
There you go. There you go.
But again, anything like too much of anything is going to overload the system and cause a response. So yeah.
All right. We're on
rant.
to next. Chase Cantrell. All right. My right foot is flat and it causes me very bad ankle pain. Maybe getting really flexible with the 18-minute stretching routine will help fix it? ? Also, what should I get after I get pretty good at the 18-minute stretching routine? Thank you. It's the flexibility solves everything.
Yes, the magical cure-all.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly right. Like, it's and the reason we're kind of laughing at this is because it, as I started with the first question, like, it does come up so much, and it does fascinate me that like flexibility has got this sort of status as the thing that will fix all injuries. And if you think about what's happening when a foot is flat, so part of it's going to be just like a genetic thing. I have really flat feet genetically. That kind of partly comes down to just like bone shape. Partly will come down to like how naturally lax or taut your ligaments are to provide a passive structure there. And part of it will be going to be around the muscles that actually control your feet and how active they are in maintaining an arch. Part of it's going to be structural higher up. So if your knees cave, like if your knees knock in because you've got weak hips as well, or your hip shape is such that you're generally a bit knock-kneed, that's going to create a up the chain reason for flat feet. So when thinking about all of that, like, there's no reason, like when you think about flexibility, that's all about pushing two ends of ranges. It's not, and at the moment you're in an end range position. So what we want to do is be able to control a mid-range position, and that comes from getting strong. And often people forget that the feet can get strong because they don't, it's something you don't usually train intentionally. But for someone like yourself and someone like myself who has very flat feet that have caused me issues in the past, it's so important to do, like, have some intentional plan about how you get your feet strong. So I did see that there was a Facebook, there's a YouTube video linked to you, which I think was from one of our podcasts, or is an old YouTube series about how to strengthen up the feet with specific exercises. So definitely follow that up and do have a look just generally on YouTube. You can find plenty of intrinsic foot muscle strengthening things, but also we're really keen on training barefoot at Unity Gym because it's a great way of when you don't have shoes to do all the support in your feet, the muscles have to do a bit of work, and that's a nice way of like gradually exposing yourself to different movements without shoe support. Also, walking around barefoot as much as you can is a really nice option if you can. And if you've the thing that often is done for flat feet is wearing orthotics. And now there are certainly times when orthotics are appropriate, and talk to a good podiatrist about when that is. But I repeat, good podiatrist, because someone will just get orthotic no matter what. And I've done rants on other shows about that. But I used to wear orthotics for years and years and years, and I got to the point where if I didn't wear them, my feet would just hurt and I couldn't do anything, even like walk down a beach, because it was so painful. And so the really key thing to understand is the orthotics are a tool that should like facilitate you training and exercising and getting to a point where you're not reliant on them, unless it's a very serious type of foot flattening that is not the norm. But yeah, what I did was basically, I went a bit too hard too early and got into barefoot running. But what we'd recommend is, start spending more time barefoot, start training barefoot, and then doing some specific foot exercises with, again, just like with every other strength stimulus, you want to give stimulus and then recovery. So don't do it every day, but start to build up that intrinsic foot strength, and that will help. Now, doing the 18-minute stretching routine is going to be a nice thing that you can do while barefoot, and doing that will indirectly be a good option. But I'd really focus on a bit more specific strengthening. Now, the other thing, as I talked about before, there's controllables and uncontrollables, so you can't change your genetic bone shape or how taut or lax your ligaments are. But with the hip and knee control, that is certainly something that you can control and improve. So working on single leg balance, working on lateral hip stability, and especially when it comes to function, and then like functionally translating that. So if you do any like sports or running or walking or I don't know, gymnastics, learning how to like land in a good hip and knee position, then that's kind of going to be the progression there. But yeah, that's quite a lot for that. What do you think about that, Rich? Makes sense? Anything to add?
Yep. I think, mate, if your goal is flexibility, the 18-minute stretching routine is just a starter, just a taste of what flexibility training that we offer. Jumping into any of the other routines and programs is any choice, any option is going to be a good one.
Yep.
Flexibility masterclass, the 18-minute mobility routine, 18-minute flexibility routines, a bunch of them. Any of them that you choose is going to benefit you.
Yeah. So, like, if your plan is to get flexible because you want to get flexible, definitely do it and go on that journey. It's a wonderful journey, and there's been some amazing results from people training
Same with the
in the
strength
gym.
routines. If you want to add a little bit of strength, upper body, lower body strength routine to your day, any of the programs we sell is going to be great for you, mate.
Yeah. So definitely, if you want to get stretching for the sake of stretching and being flexible, do it. If your only reason that you want to get flexible is to fix this ankle pain, then you're going to be really disappointed because it almost certainly won't fix your ankle pain. You've got to build up strength, and the specific foot strength, not just a general program. So hope that is helpful. Cool.
Yeah. So the next question is from Dean Weber. He's asking, I'm just going to make this a little bit shorter because the question goes on a little bit. He's basically asking when you've got, in regards to full range of motion training, you've got bodybuilders that take their joints to full range of motion. And if full range of motion resistance training is physiologically equivalent to eccentric loaded stretching, then why isn't there more flexible bodybuilders? I'm pretty sure that's more or less what he's trying to say with his question.
Yeah, so this comes off the back of, we were talking on a podcast recently about flexibility and loaded stretching and that strength through range, and especially doing loaded eccentrics is a great way to get flexible and quite different from the old school passive stretching approach. And then Dean popped up with this comment.
Yeah. He's also asked if one trains full range of motion with load, is supplementary stretching flexibility work on the same muscle group redundant? And I would say it's not redundant. Definitely not. Do you want to go first, Phil?
Yeah. Okay. So with the looking at bodybuilders, that's true. Like, it's really common to see most bodybuilders will be some of the stiffest people you'll ever see. There are some exceptions to that rule, like Juju Mufu is an internet favorite of someone who is jacked and incredibly flexible. But yeah, he's definitely not the norm. And so, looking at this idea between end range strength, loaded eccentrics versus what a typical bodybuilder will do. Bodybuilders, you're right, do spend a lot of time in the eccentric phase. The whole with bodybuilding, if you're not too aware of the approach, it's all about sort of time under tension with bodybuilding. So basically keeping the muscle under tension, which would mean slowing down your eccentric, not pausing, keeping and generally a slower concentric is quite common in bodybuilding compared to something like powerlifting or Olympic lifting. Though there is some debate about bar speed and muscle hypertrophy, but that's a debate we don't need to go into. But that's that time under tension is really key. So often you'll see as well, like there'll be things like supersets, giant sets, where you're basically doing like working on the same muscle group, like one after another, to really get a high level of fatigue in a long period of time under tension, which is definitely more Richie's domain. If anyone's been seeing the photos of him recently, than old endurance runner of me over here. But that's like the common bodybuilding approach is definitely lots of time under tension. But what is probably more common in bodybuilding is really like, although they like, usually when I see bodybuilders train, they're not necessarily spending lots of time in the outer range. They're doing a lot of inner range training. That's right, what outer and inner range training means is basically if you're doing a bicep curl and my arm is straight, and especially because it crosses the shoulder, if it's in an extended position, that's going to be the bicep at its longest range. So that's the outer range. And then when we look at inner range, if I go into elbow flexion, so bringing my hand up to my shoulder and then also lifting my elbow up so my shoulder's in flexion, that's going to be when all the muscle fibers are at their shortest.
Yeah.
And so
I would argue that most bodybuilders don't go to full range.
Yes.
Like when I think at the top of my head, I only know a few bodybuilders that are really flexible. Ben Pekulski's one.
Yeah.
He's like elite level, but he's the only one that I can really think of that is highly flexible and incredibly massive, you know.
And exactly right. And that's what Dean's saying. He's like, why aren't more bodybuilders, really flexible? And that is because most bodybuilders will be spending most of their time in inner range. And it's such a like...
Yeah. And you also have to think of like, range of motion is only one little element to what makes a person more flexible, really. Like the whole intention of what you're doing in your exercise and in your workout matters greatly. In a bodybuilder's mindset, he's after, muscle fatigue, muscle damage, like pumping out as many reps as he can while still lifting a relatively challenging weight. Whereas someone that's after flexibility, their whole goal is more range, So I think it's what you're doing, what you're telling the nervous system to do, what you're telling the body to do, repetition time after time. Like, it's very different.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, like, one thing is intention behind it, but what he's saying is, like, if we're saying that going slow eccentric through range makes you more flexible, that he thinks that's what that resembles what bodybuilders do. But I think that, it does come down to, like, most bodybuilders won't be spending time in, like, loaded end range.
Yeah.
Like out, especially outer range, like that's just not
nearly
how their training looks, and exactly, and they're really, it does look, if you look at a bodybuilding program versus what we suggested with our with like the programs here with the loaded stretching, you can just by watching you can see that there's a very big difference between doing like a loaded isometric and doing a superset of pec flies.
Yep.
So
I'll tell you one thing though. Going to, like, if you're doing a Romanian deadlift and you're keeping your knees straight and you're bending well through your hips and not too much through your lower back, you will improve flexibility, no doubt. I mean, I'm a good example of that. I did basically no stretching before my time here working with Rad and Yanni, but I did do Romanian deadlifts and I did do that loaded. So I did develop a good level of flexibility just doing those movements. But like compared to truly flexible people, it's nothing,
Yep.
And it's a big limiting factor when you're lifting weights going to that extended far range. Like you won't be able to lift as much, and that's kind of contradicts to what you're trying to do when you're trying to build strength and muscle size. Is you want to be trying to lift that heavy weight as many times as possible. If that end range is stopping you from doing that, that's a limitation. So
100%. And so, what you'll see is with bodybuilders, like, often because the end range is the hardest part of the lift, they'll start to like not go towards that outer range because they won't be able to continue getting that enough time on attention. So they'll often sort of even shorten and stay out of that end range to stop it. And so remember with flexibility, so much of it is that neurological part of it where you're basically you're trying to build like a subconscious trust of your body that it can handle certain ranges of motion, and that takes being like relaxed, and even when you're doing like a loaded isometric, you're trying to find this like peace at that end range, whereas like a bodybuilder, as we said, won't be pausing in range. They'll be, if they're even getting there, they'll be kind of quickly moving through it. So it's just a very different stimulus. And so with the bonus question, if one trains full ROM with load, is supplementary stretching, flexibility, or the work on the same muscle group redundant? And again, it depends on, like, if you were to say, train with full ROM with load and spend time in that like end range, then you'd be closer towards stretching flexibility work. But if you're really like not even pausing and getting straight out of there, then the flexibility won't be the same. But the takeaway is, no, it's not redundant. Like, there's a very different intention behind it. Here's Rad. we're just finishing up the questions here. We've got Steve, but thanks for your we love like feedback on what we say in the session. So good on you, Dean. And just before we do finish up, we've got Stephen Pellegrino watching live, and he said, "How does end range strength relate to tendon strength? Is the shortened range of strength equal to compression strength? And must it entail cramping?" Great question, Steve. But why didn't you ask it earlier? We've run out of time, so.
Hey, we can always answer that on the UMS online coaching because that's what we're going to be swapping over
and
to.
Stephen is a member. But what we might do is end range strength relate to tendon strength. Tendon strength is going to be a limiting factor for strength. If your tendons can't handle it, then there's going to be problems. This is a big question, and Rad looks like he wants to get started in this online coaching. So maybe we'll leave that for the next physio Q&A.
Definitely.
How about that? Yeah, Steve, I told you at the beginning, get your questions in early. Nice.
So yeah, anyone listening to the show, tuning in live or listening to it after, if you want your questions answered, get them in and we'll have them up for the next Q&A.
But let's just ask Rad quickly, does shortened range compression strength always entail cramping? Do you ever get to the point where it stops cramping?
Absolutely.
Get your mic.
Absolutely. Yes, you do. Yes,
One day.
It
stick
does
with
stop cramping eventually.
The body adapts to what you spend your time doing.
Yeah.
We talked about, so.
It fucking sucks. The journey is long. But
And there's the explicit tag. We nearly got away with it, and then Rad had to walk in and make us put that explicit tag.
It sucks, but you get there eventually, yeah.
Cool. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Fun to have a chat with you, Rich. The mysterious rig behind the camera.
Good to be on the show.
With a smooth voice. And we'll see you again tomorrow.